So a lot of people are talking about a male reading crisis. Is it a crisis? Are men reading? Well, in a reader poll, the number of men who've actually picked up a book or short story collection within a year, within the last year, is something like 27%, as compared to women reading, which, estimates say is 50, 60%. And that is kind of horrendous. I think most people would agree that that's a crisis. I don't know about a crisis, but it's not looking good. The people who say, "Oh, men don't need to read," or why is it even a problem? Oh my gosh. I mean, of all mediums of entertainment, literature is kind of the frontier of new ideas. And to say that it's only for one demographic is asinine. I don't care what demographic we're talking about. Reading should be for everyone. It opens the mind, it opens the imagination, all of that. Of course, it's easy for me to say that. I am a writer and I'm a big-time reader. However, I really do think that we're doing men a disservice by saying, "Oh, who cares?" That's not the right attitude. Come on. Now, to just shrug and say, "Oh, we can't do anything about it," or "there's no way we can possibly understand it," I think that's wrong as well. So let's dive in. So I'm obviously a woman, however, I joke that I am a male reader and a male author. Why am I saying that? It's because I prefer stories that supposedly men like to read. Action, adventure, power progression, strong, heroic kind of characters, big, epic, high stakes, high octane, whatever you want to call it, and even big ideas. So for whatever reason, it seems women supposedly go for stories that are about interpersonal drama, romance, love triangles, teen angst. I do not understand why that's a thing. However, data supposedly shows it, okay? And I think if anyone walks into a Barnes & Noble or a library and looks at what's on the shelves, in not just the classics section, but in general fiction or new fiction, you're going to see, in libraries, you might see a lot of romance, a lot of mysteries. You might see some 1980s horror and that sort of thing. True crime. These are all honestly about personal stories, intimate drama. Okay, so thrillers, action, military sci-fi, or just sci-fi in general, all of that's more male supposedly, and we just don't see a lot of those on the shelves. People are finding it in more indie spaces, online, ebooks, audiobooks, and that sort of thing. And I'll dive into that in a minute. However, to me, it's kind of undeniable that if you even just look at the big bestsellers of the last 20 years or so, Fourth Wing, A Court of Thorns and Roses, Hunger Games, Twilight, Shadow and Bone, a lot of them are teen angst, teen drama, a girl caught between two guys trying to figure out what the best path forward is, maybe challenging an empire or challenging the patriarchy. But these are honestly not the kind of stories I enjoy reading. And I suspect a lot of men don't entirely go for them. Obviously, there's exceptions, but I'm not talking about the exceptions here. I'm talking about general trends. So I read Hunger Games and it was all right. I didn't really feel like rooting too much for Katniss. It's an interesting idea. Twilight, oh my gosh. I read the first book and vampire creeping on a young woman. And it's oh, so beautiful and he sparkles. Oh no, not for me. Not for me. So I haven't even tried Fourth Wing or Court of Thorns and Roses. I did try Shadow and Bone. Again, not for me. I feel like these stories to me are small. They're about what the heart wants. And there's nothing wrong with that, of course. Everyone can like what they like. But these are not the stories I go for, and I am not finding the stories I want in mainstream big publishing. So I've kind of found the progression fantasy niche, hard magic, things like that, lit RPG and superhero fiction. That's what I go for. I like the big, epic, high-stakes, heroic stories. So let's talk about why publishers are making these decisions. A lot of big publishers are data-driven, starting with the Nielsen BookScan data, and just more and more analytics are coming into how book buyers and booksellers and retailers and publishers are making decisions. They're looking at data. Data tells you what worked in the past, and they're basing their decisions on that instead of taking risks on things that don't have a proven track record yet. So I think there's a lot of that. People say the midlist is declining and dying, the midlist being books that are not the big, giant mega bestsellers, the lower down ones that are still selling all right, kind of bread and butter, the authors are still making a living, but they're not at the very top. Publishers are not investing in those anymore, and I guess like in the 1980s, 1990s, early 2000s, the midlist was a place for experimentation where authors would kind of try new things out and publishers would take a little bit of risk on it. And that isn't happening anymore. So most of the risk, I believe most of the innovation is happening in underground niches with small, quirky, small presses and indie authors that are not the ones that are just following a trend when writing to market, but taking chances on new things. These are not happening in the big mainstream spaces or even in the best-selling spaces. They're underground. But I think there's yet another factor as to why most of what big publishing is putting out is aimed at younger women. And I think that has to do with outsourcing. Most of the gatekeepers have outsourced their slush piles to underpaid interns at literary agencies. These underpaid interns, I think a lot of them tend to be from a certain demographic. Obviously, if they're not supporting a family, they're mostly young. And I think they really are mostly women. Many of them are networking in the New York publishing scene, so they're living in very expensive areas, most likely supported by their parents, taking these kind of low-wage, high-stress jobs. Now, what do they read? How much time do they have to read? These are the ones that are the tastemakers. These are the people looking at the slush pile and choosing what gets sent up the chain to the literary agent, who then is selling it to an acquisitions editor, who is then selling it to booksellers and retailers. And, there's a whole bunch of middlemen involved, and it's a chain. So these tastemakers, if you're a 25-year-old woman, you probably have read certain things. Even me, I was a 25-year-old woman once, and most of what I'd read at that point in my life was a lot of Stephen King, a lot of Anne Rice. I know that's dating me, but I think that says something. I had not yet even discovered entire genres that I now love. And fact of the matter is, if you're young, you're probably in a singles or dating scene, even just newlywed, recently married. You're in a stage of life where you're looking for relationships. And so drama, teen drama, and relationship drama is factoring big in your mind. On top of all of that, big publishing does seem to have a thing against epic series, especially in the US. They have kind of a mantra, which is standalone with series potential, meaning they want the first book to be a complete standalone with complete arcs. In other words, not super epic ending on a cliffhanger where there's going to be another book where it's planned to be a massive trilogy or something. They have a thing against that. Big stakes epic stories are very hard sell to the main publishers right now. And I believe, again, I think that's driven by the data where they're seeing what worked in the past. Brandon Sanderson notwithstanding, not talking about Robert Jordan, because those series took off in the 1990s or the early 2000s, not in the last 5 years, which is the data that most of them are looking at. So let's say I'm a male reader, which honestly I am because that's where my tastes are. Let's say I want competency porn. I want a hard magic system with a hero that is figuring out kind of MacGyvering situations and taking over the world that way, defeating an evil empire that way. Oh, I'm not finding it right now in what's coming out from the big five and the big retailers. So if I'm just not finding what I like, I've got two paths here. It's either I quit reading entirely, I stick with video games, film, and TV, and I get my entertainment stories that way. Or I stumble upon an underground niche, manga, light novels, web serials. And honestly, that's where I went. That's what I stumbled upon. I'm going to recommend the subreddit ProgressionFantasy, because Progression Fantasy is kind of an umbrella term for lit RPG, superheroes, hard magic system, power progression, mage wizards, and things like that are just kicking ass, taking names, destroying evil empires and that sort of thing. You're looking for justice porn or competency porn, that's where you're going to find it. And by porn, of course, I don't mean sex. I mean, it's the story is about that. The focus is just a mess of that. And I think that's what readers like me love. I do think Progression Fantasy is kind of a rebrand of sword and sorcery or epic heroic fantasy, which was popular, again, with young men mostly in the 1980s. One of those books did recently break out into mainstream, Dungeon Crawler Carl, which took off on Royal Road as a web serial, and then it got picked up eventually in print by a publisher, a mainstream publisher, and now it is actually in bookstores and people have heard about it in the mainstream. And I hope that will work to bring more male readers back into reading. There have been a few other indie authors that I believe are appealing to men's tastes and my tastes as well, which would be Dennis Taylor with We Are Bob, Andy Weir with Project Hail Mary, and really I would say a lot of science fiction authors in general. Science fiction is the playground of new ideas and innovation, and of course, I think that's another reason big publishing is avoiding it. You just aren't seeing too many sci-fi books being loved upon and showered with ad spend and whatnot, big marketing budgets. You're not seeing that from the big five. You are seeing it in the indie space, which again, not big five budgets, it's small, it's underground. If you're looking for those kind of stories, they do exist. There are 11,000 books published per day on Amazon. Tons of books are out there, and there really is great stuff out there, gems hidden in the pile, if you know where to look. And that's the problem, I think. Most people don't know where to look or having trouble finding it, with very good reason. And I hope that all the rhetoric against men reading, whatever that's about, I hope that dies down, because we need a world where men do enjoy reading as well as women. I don't understand why that's controversial. There's nothing sexier than an intellectual man or a man who likes to curl up with a good story and a good book and just enjoys the hell out of it. I think the world will be a better place with more men like that and more women that value that in a man.